The first sign something was wrong wasn't the roses, it was the water bill. When Daniel Harper opened the envelope from the utility company, he stared at the number for a long moment. His quiet countryside home barely used any water. It was just him, his small vegetable garden, and the occasional sprinkler on hot summer days, but the bill in his hand was almost triple the normal amount. At first, Daniel assumed it had to be a mistake, yet when he checked the meter outside his house, something strange caught his attention. The dial was spinning. Even though every faucet in his home was turned off, that meant one thing: somewhere, water was flowing. Daniel slowly followed the underground irrigation line that ran along the side of his yard. The pipe eventually disappeared beneath the wooden fence that separated his property from the neighboring house, and that neighbor happened to be the newest and most vocal member of the local HOA board. Her name was Linda Parker. Linda was famous in the neighborhood for two things: enforcing HOA rules with extreme enthusiasm, and her obsession with her rose garden. Her backyard was filled with rows of perfectly arranged roses in every shade of red and pink imaginable. Daniel had always admired them from a distance, but as he looked at the pipe disappearing under the fence, a quiet realization began forming in his mind: the roses weren't the only thing growing back there, someone was using his water. And Daniel was about to discover exactly how. Daniel didn't rush into accusations. Instead, he watched. For the next few days, he carefully monitored the water meter. Every morning it spun steadily for hours, even though Daniel hadn't used a single drop. One afternoon he finally heard it, the faint hiss of sprinklers. The sound was coming from the other side of the fence. Daniel walked along the wooden boards until he found a small gap between two planks. Peeking through, he saw Linda standing proudly in her garden, adjusting a long hose connected to a network of sprinklers watering her prized roses. The water sprayed in perfect arcs across the flower beds, but what caught Daniel's attention wasn't the roses, it was the hose connection. The bright green hose snaked across her yard, straight toward the base of the fence, and Daniel already knew what was on the other side. Later that evening, he walked around the fence line and found exactly what he expected. Hidden beneath a small patch of mulch was a plastic connector attached directly to his irrigation pipe. Linda had quietly tapped into his water supply. Daniel sighed. Most people might have stormed next door immediately, but Daniel had a different idea. Because if Linda loved her roses so much, he wanted them to grow. He just wanted them to grow in a way she would never forget, and what Daniel planned next would turn the most perfect garden in the neighborhood into something no one expected. The next morning Daniel visited a small garden supply store just outside town. He picked up something unusual, a harmless landscaping dye. It was commonly used by landscapers to track irrigation flow through pipes. The liquid was completely safe for plants and soil, but it had one interesting feature: it turned water bright purple, and it smelled very strong. The scent wasn't dangerous, but it definitely wasn't pleasant either. Daniel returned home and quietly poured a small amount into his irrigation tank. Then he waited. Later that afternoon, just as he expected, the water meter began spinning again. On the other side of the fence, Linda's sprinklers came to life. The purple-tinted water traveled through the hidden connector and flowed directly into her garden system. Daniel couldn't see the roses from his yard, but he didn't need to. Within minutes, a faint smell drifted through the air. It wasn't terrible, but it was noticeable, and as the sprinkler system continued running, the scent grew stronger. Daniel leaned back on his porch, sipping iced tea as the summer breeze carried the strange smell through the neighborhood. The roses were still being watered, but now, something very unusual was happening to Linda's perfect garden, and soon, the entire HOA would notice. It didn't take long. By the following morning, several neighbors walking their dogs stopped outside Linda's house. Her famous rose garden looked different. The leaves had a faint purple tint. The soil between the flowers had turned a soft violet color. Even the small puddles near the sprinkler head shimmered slightly in the sunlight, and the smell was impossible to ignore. Linda stormed outside holding a watering can. "What happened to my roses?" she shouted. A few neighbors shrugged, unsure what to say. Then Linda noticed the color spreading through the flower beds. The purple water had soaked into nearly every corner of her carefully designed garden. The roses themselves were still healthy, but the entire yard looked like someone had spilled gallons of grape juice across the soil. Linda marched straight to Daniel's house. She knocked loudly on the door. When Daniel opened it, she pointed angrily toward the fence. "Did you do something to my garden water?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "My garden water?" Linda paused, and in that moment, she realized she had said something she probably shouldn't have. Daniel folded his arms calmly. "Linda," he said gently, "why would my water affect your garden?" Linda hesitated. Neighbors nearby had started watching the conversation from the sidewalk. "Well, because. she stammered. Daniel stepped outside and walked toward the fence. He brushed aside the mulch near the base of the boards, revealing the hidden plastic connector. The small pipe leading from his irrigation line was still attached. Several neighbors gasped quietly. Daniel turned back toward Linda. "So this is why my water bill tripled." Linda's face turned bright red. "I was just borrowing a little water," she muttered. Daniel nodded slowly. "A little water that runs all day." The purple tint had now spread across most of the garden beds. The smell drifted gently through the air. It wasn't unbearable, but it certainly wasn't pleasant. Linda looked back at her roses in disbelief. "My garden is ruined." Daniel shook his head calmly. "No, Linda. Your garden is just colorful." The neighbors tried not to laugh, but the situation was about to take one more unexpected turn, because someone had already reported the water issue to the HOA board, and they were about to arrive. Within an hour, 2 HOA board members pulled into the street. Linda immediately rushed toward them. "Daniel sabotaged my garden," she insisted. The board members walked toward the fence and examined the irrigation pipe. Then they noticed the connector. One of them looked directly at Linda. "Is this connected to his water line?" Linda didn't answer. Daniel simply showed them the utility bill and the spinning water meter. The board members exchanged awkward glances. Linda had been one of the loudest voices enforcing HOA rules for years, but now the situation looked very different. One board member cleared his throat. "Using someone else's water supply without permission is against community rules." Linda's shoulders dropped. The purple soil, the strange smell, and the watching neighbors made the moment even more embarrassing. Daniel didn't look angry. He simply removed the connector and capped his pipe. The purple water stopped flowing, but the lesson was already growing in Linda's garden, and the HOA board had one final decision to make. By evening, the HOA sent out an official notice. Linda was responsible for paying Daniel's excess water bill. She was also required to remove the unauthorized pipe connection. Her famous rose garden slowly returned to normal over the following weeks. The purple tint faded, the smell disappeared, but the story never did. Neighbors still chuckled when they walked past the yard. Linda eventually replanted several flower beds and kept her irrigation system properly connected, and Daniel's water meter finally stopped spinning when it shouldn't. Sometimes the simplest solution isn't anger, sometimes it's patience. And a little creativity, because Daniel never yelled, he never started an argument. He simply let the truth flow through the pipes, and in the end, the roses told the whole story, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.